Jake Mitchell stood in front of the mirror in his small cabin aboard the USS Horizon and adjusted his dress uniform one more time. The blue fabric felt stiff against his skin, but he knew today was not about comfort. Today was about making history. He was about to meet aliens for the first time, and not just any aliens, but royalty from one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. The year was 2387, and humanity had only recently figured out how to travel faster than light. For decades, humans had dreamed of meeting other intelligent life, but when it finally happened 6 months ago, the contact had been brief and formal. A Zephyrian scout ship had appeared near Earth, and after some tense moments, both sides had agreed to arrange proper diplomatic meetings. Now Jake found himself on humanity's most important mission ever as the lead cultural liaison. He was 32 years old and had spent most of his career studying alien cultures from the few reports available. His friends often joked that he was too honest for diplomacy, but his superiors believed that genuine personality might be exactly what humanity needed. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Commander Alex Turner entered without waiting for permission, which was typical for Jake's best friend since academy days. Alex was the military advisor for this mission, and he looked even more nervous than Jake felt. The Zephyrians are not like us, Jake, Alex said while pacing the small room. They have ruled multiple star systems for over 1,000 years. Their technology makes ours look like stone tools. We cannot afford to mess this up. Jake nodded and tried to look confident. I know, Alex, but Dr. Chang has been preparing me for months. I know all the protocols. Bow exactly 15 degrees. Use formal titles at all times. Never make direct eye contact. With royalty. Speak only when spoken to. Keep responses short and respectful. Alex stopped pacing and looked at his friend. You also know that one wrong word could mean the difference between alliance and war, right? These aliens could wipe out Earth without breaking a sweat. The only reason they are talking to us is curiosity about this new species that somehow developed faster than light travel. Before Jake could respond, the ship's communication system crackled to life. All senior staff report to the briefing room immediately. The briefing room buzzed with nervous energy as the diplomatic team gathered around the large table. Captain Lisa Rodriguez stood at the front, looking calm and professional as always, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. She had commanded 3 different starships over her 20-year career, but nothing had prepared her for this. Dr. Peter Chang shuffled his papers nervously while reviewing his notes about Zephyrian culture one more time. The elderly linguist had learned their language faster than anyone thought possible, but he still worried about making translation errors that could cause diplomatic disasters. Good morning, everyone, Captain Rodriguez began. In approximately 4 hours, we will dock with the Zephyrian flagship. This represents not just first contact for our species, but potentially our future among the stars. The Zephyrians control trade routes that could benefit Earth enormously, but they also have the power to isolate us completely. She activated the holographic display showing images of the alien vessel. The Zephyrian ship was massive and beautiful, with crystal spires that seemed to grow from its hull like frozen lightning. Advanced technology was visible everywhere, from energy shields that shimmered like soap bubbles to weapon systems that defied human understanding. Our intelligence suggests the Zephyrians value formality above all else, Captain Rodriguez continued. They have rigid social hierarchies and complex honor codes. Princess Lyra Lai, who we will be meeting, is third in line for their throne and reportedly one of their most intelligent strategists. Jake studied the limited information they had about the princess. The few images showed a tall figure with purple, blue skin, and elegant features. But Zephyrian faces were hard for humans to read. What struck him most was that in every image she stood perfectly straight with an expression of complete composure. Dr. Chang cleared his throat and stood to address the team. I cannot stress enough how important proper protocol will be, he said. The Zephyrians have been watching us since first contact, and they are looking for signs of either respect or barbarism. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, you will be our primary speaker. After initial introductions, Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. Everything he said would be analyzed not just by the aliens, but by historians for generations to come. One wrong word could brand humanity as unworthy of galactic society. The briefing continued for another hour, covering every detail of Zephyrian customs they had managed to learn. Jake memorized the proper greeting gestures, the formal phrases he would need to use, and the topics he absolutely had to avoid. Personal comments were considered extremely rude in their society, and any reference to physical appearance could be taken as an insult. As the team dispersed to make final preparations, Jake returned to his cabin to review his notes one last time. He read about Zephyrian history, their achievements in science and art, and their complex relationships with other alien species. What impressed him most was their reputation for keeping their word once given, and their respect for intelligence and creativity. Alex found him there an hour later, staring out the small porthole at the approaching alien vessel. The Zephyrian flagship grew larger as they watched its crystal structures catching and reflecting light in ways that seemed almost magical. "You ready for this, buddy?" Alex asked. Jake turned from the window and managed a smile. "As ready as anyone can. Be for the most important conversation in human history, I guess." Alex clapped him on the shoulder. "Just remember, be yourself, but maybe tone down the part of yourself that says whatever pops into your head." Jake laughed despite his nerves. "Thanks for the confidence boost." But Alex was serious now. "I mean it, Jake. You have this way of speaking from the heart that people respond to, but aliens might not understand it the same way. These Zephyrians sound like they keep their emotions locked away tight." The ship shuddered slightly as docking procedures began. Through the porthole, Jake could see Zephyrian personnel moving with precise coordinated movements. Everything about them seemed planned and purposeful, with no wasted motion or casual gestures. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the communication system again. "All diplomatic personnel to Airlock 3. The Zephyrian delegation is ready to receive." Jake took a deep breath and picked up his formal jacket. In his mind, he ran through the greeting one more time. "Bow 15 degrees. Wait to be addressed. Respond with the formal phrase Dr. Chang had taught him. Keep answers brief and respectful. Do not make personal comments under any circumstances." As he walked toward the airlock, Jake felt the enormity of the moment settling over him. Somewhere on that beautiful alien ship waited a princess from a civilization that had mastered technologies humanity could barely imagine. In a few minutes, he would look into truly alien eyes and try to convince them that his species deserved a place among the stars. The airlock doors opened, and Jake stepped forward into the future of human civilization. The crystalline chamber aboard the Zephyrian flagship took Jake's breath away. The walls seemed to be grown rather than built with smooth surfaces that caught light and split it into rainbow patterns. Strange symbols glowed softly along the edges, providing illumination that was somehow both alien and beautiful. The ceiling stretched high above them, disappearing into shadows that seemed to move and shift. Jake walked beside Captain Rodriguez, and Dr. Chang feeling very small in the vast space. Their footsteps echoed despite the soft material covering the floor. Around them, Zephyrian nobles stood in perfect formation, wearing robes that shimmered like liquid starlight. Not one of them moved or made a sound as the human delegation entered. The aliens themselves were striking to look at. Their skin had a purple-blue tint that reminded Jake of deep ocean water, and their features were sharp and elegant. They stood, taller than most humans, with long limbs and graceful movements. But what struck Jake most was their complete stillness. They stood like statues, waiting for some signal he could not understand. At the far end of the chamber stood a group of figures, who were clearly important. Their robes were more elaborate, and they wore what looked like crowns, made of the same crystal material as the ship's walls. Jake knew from his briefings that these were members of the royal family and their highest advisors. Dr. Chang leaned close to Jake and whispered, "The princess is the tall figure in the center wearing the silver crown." Jake looked toward where Dr. Chang indicated and felt his heart skip a beat. Princess Lyrelai was even more impressive in person than the images had suggested. She stood with perfect posture, wearing robes that seemed to flow like water made of light. Her face was composed and intelligent, but there was something in her large dark eyes that seemed curious about these strange visitors from Earth. A tall Zephyrian with elaborate golden robes stepped forward. Jake recognized him from their briefings as Chancellor Corvex, the princess advisor, and one of the most powerful nobles in their empire. When he spoke, his voice was deep and formal, with the strange musical quality that all Zephyrians seemed to possess. "Welcome, representatives of humanity," the Chancellor said. "We greet you in the name of Emperor Vexathera, ruler of 17 worlds and protector of the ancient ways. You stand in the presence of Princess Lyrelai, third heir to the crystal throne keeper of wisdom and guardian of our peoples. Future Captain Rodriguez stepped forward and bowed exactly 15 degrees as they had practiced. She spoke the formal response that Dr. Chang had taught them all. "We are honored by your greeting and grateful for this opportunity to meet. We come in peace, seeking understanding between our peoples." The princess moved forward with steps that seemed to float rather than walk. When she spoke, her voice was clear and melodious, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. She spoke about the importance of peace between civilizations, about learning from each other, and about the responsibilities that came with traveling among the stars. Jake found himself listening not just to her words, but to the way she spoke them. There was passion beneath her formal language, a genuine belief in what she was saying. Despite all the ceremony and protocol, he could sense that she truly cared about making this meeting successful. As the princess continued speaking about cooperation and mutual respect, Jake felt overwhelmed by the moment. Here was this incredible being from a civilization far older and more advanced than humanity, speaking words of peace and hope. Her intelligence was obvious in every carefully chosen phrase, and her dedication to her people showed in the way she held herself. The formal speeches continued with each side reciting prepared statements about their intentions and hopes for the future. Jake waited for his turn, knowing that he would need to give the response he had memorized about humanity's eagerness to learn from Zephyrian wisdom. But as Princess Lyrelay concluded her remarks with a particularly beautiful passage about species, working together to explore the mysteries of the universe, something inside Jake shifted. The words she spoke were so genuine and hopeful that they touched something deep in his heart. When the time came for his prepared response, Jake stepped forward and bowed as he had been taught. He opened his mouth to recite the formal phrases Dr. Chang had drilled into him, but instead what came out was completely different. "You are absolutely lovely, Your Highness," Jake said with complete sincerity. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence that filled the chamber. Every Zephyrian noble turned to stare at him. Captain Rodriguez closed her eyes, and Jake could practically feel her trying not to groan out loud. Dr. Chang looked like he might faint from horror at this breach of protocol. But Jake kept his eyes on Princess Lyrelay and saw something amazing happen. The purple-blue tint of her skin deepened to a richer shade, and her perfectly composed expression shifted slightly. Her large dark eyes widened just a fraction, and for the first time since entering the chamber she looked surprised. Princess stood perfectly still for what felt like an eternity. The silence stretched on until Jake began to wonder if he had just started an interstellar war with 3 simple words. Then, in a voice so soft he almost missed it, Princess Lyrelay spoke. "Say it again." "Human," she whispered. Chancellor Corvex made a sound of shock, and several other nobles began murmuring among themselves. Jake could hear Dr. Chang behind him making small, distressed noises, but he ignored them all. Something in the princess' voice told him that despite breaking every rule of diplomacy, he had somehow done something right. Jake looked directly into her eyes, which he knew was another violation of protocol, and spoke from his heart. "You are lovely," he said, with even more warmth than before. "Your words about peace between our peoples, they are beautiful. The way you care about making this work, it shows in everything you say." The princess' skin darkened even more, and Jake realized he was seeing the Zephyrian equivalent of blushing. She raised one elegant hand to silence Chancellor Corvex, who was clearly preparing to say something about this breach in proper behavior in all my years of diplomatic meetings. The princess said, still speaking softly, "No one has ever addressed me with such directness. Your words carry emotion in a way that formal speech cannot." Chancellor Corvex could not remain silent any longer. "Your Highness, this human has violated every protocol of proper address. Such personal comments are highly inappropriate in formal diplomatic settings," but Princess Lyrelay held up her hand again and kept her eyes on Jake. She seemed to be studying him with new interest, as if seeing humans in a completely different light than before. "Tell me, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell," she said, using his name for the first time. "Is this how humans normally communicate with each other? Do you always speak so directly about what you observe and feel?" Jake glanced back at Captain Rodriguez, who looked torn between horror and curiosity about where this was going. Dr. Chang was frantically checking his notes as if looking for some protocol that might cover this situation. We do speak more directly than your formal customs allow, Jake admitted. When something moves us or impresses us, we tend to express those feelings openly. I meant no disrespect, Your Highness. Your intelligence and dedication to peace genuinely impressed me. The princess was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. Around them, the chamber remained silent except for the soft humming of alien technology. Finally, she spoke again, and this time there was something different in her voice, something warmer. In Zephyrian society, personal observations and emotional responses are kept private, she explained. Only family members or those with the deepest bonds speak to each other as, "You have spoken to me." Your words were unexpected but not unwelcome. Chancellor Corvex looked scandalized, but the princess continued. Perhaps there is something we can learn from human directness, just as you can learn from our formal traditions. Jake felt a spark of hope. Maybe he had not ruined everything after all. Maybe somehow his honest response had opened a door that formal diplomacy could not. 3 days had passed since the formal first contact ceremony, and Jake found himself in a situation he never could have imagined. Princess Lyreley had specifically requested his presence at what she called cultural exchange sessions. Each morning he would report to a beautiful chamber filled with crystalline furniture that seemed to grow from the floor itself, where the princess waited with questions about human customs and behavior. The other members of the diplomatic team were busy with technical discussions about trade agreements and territorial boundaries, but Jake spent his days explaining things he had never really thought about before. Why did humans laugh when they were happy, and sometimes when they were nervous? How did human families show affection to each other? What made humans willing to take risks for people they cared about? Princess Lyreley listened to everything with intense concentration, taking notes on a device that projected glowing symbols into the air. She seemed particularly fascinated by the idea that humans shared their emotions openly, instead of keeping them private. Today, Jake brought his portable music player, hoping to share something uniquely human with her. When the first song began playing, Princess Lyreley tilted her head in a way that reminded Jake of a curious bird. The sounds create patterns that affect your emotional state, she observed. This is remarkable. Zephyrian music is mathematical and precise, but this has irregularities that somehow make it more compelling. Jake smiled at her scientific approach to something he had always taken for granted. Music is not just about perfect patterns, he explained. Sometimes the unexpected notes or the way a singer's voice breaks with emotion can be the most beautiful part. He played several different songs for her, ranging from gentle ballads to energetic rock music. With each new style, Princess Lyreley asked detailed questions about why certain combinations of sounds made humans feel happy or sad or excited. Jake found himself trying to explain concepts like rhythm and harmony to someone who had never experienced music as an emotional language. The most interesting moment came when he played a love song. The princess's skin shifted to deeper purple hues as she listened, and when the song ended, she was quiet for a long time. Among my people, she said finally, such personal expressions of affection are never shared publicly. The emotions described in that song would be considered far too intimate for anyone but bonded partners to hear. Jake felt a flutter of nervousness as he realized he might have crossed another cultural boundary. I am sorry if that made you uncomfortable, he said. I did not think about how personal those lyrics might seem to someone from your culture, but Princess Lyreley shook her head. I was not uncomfortable, she said quietly. I was fascinated by the courage it must take to express such vulnerable feelings and trust that others will understand, rather than judge. Over the following days, their conversations grew more personal. Princess Lyreley began sharing details about Zephyrian society that went far beyond what was in the official briefings. She told Jake about the weight of royal duty and how every word she spoke in public was analyzed for hidden meanings. She described growing up in a palace where showing too much emotion was considered a sign of weakness. In return, Jake found himself talking about his own life in ways he rarely did with anyone. He told her about growing up on a farm where his family expressed love through actions rather than formal words. He described his decision to join the space service because he wanted to see what lay beyond Earth's borders and maybe help humanity find its place among the stars. One evening they met in the observation deck of the Zephyrian ship, where massive windows provided a view of space that took Jake's breath away. Stars stretched in every direction, and in the distance he could see the blue marble of Earth looking tiny and precious. Princess Lyrelay stood beside him, looking out at the same view. When she spoke, her voice was softer than usual. "Jake," she said, and he noticed she had started using his name instead of his title. "Why did you call me lovely during our first meeting? Was it simply an impulse, or did you mean something specific by it?" Jake considered the question carefully. He had been thinking about that moment himself and trying to understand what had made him abandon all his diplomatic training. "When I listened to you speak about peace and cooperation between our species, he said I could hear how much you truly cared about making it work. Your intelligence was obvious, but more than that, your genuine desire to help both our peoples succeed came through in every word. That combination of wisdom and compassion struck me as beautiful." Princess Lyrelay was quiet for several minutes watching the stars. Finally, she turned to face him, and Jake was surprised to see uncertainty in her eyes. In Zephyrian culture, she said personal compliments are only given by family members or life-bonded partners. "When you called me lovely, it was the first time anyone had ever spoken to me with such warmth and directness. I did not know how to respond." Jake felt his heart speed up as he realized the implications of what she was telling him. "I had no idea," he said. "I hope I did not make you uncomfortable or put you in a difficult position." She shook her head and took a step closer to him. "You did not make me uncomfortable," she said. "You made me curious about what it would be like to live in a world where people could express genuine feelings without fear of judgment or political consequences." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Chancellor Corvex, who looked disapproving as he found them standing so close together. "Your Highness," he said stiffly, "the formal negotiations require your attention." Princess Lyrelay straightened immediately and her expression returned to the composed mask Jake had seen during their first meeting. "Of course, Chancellor," she said. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, thank you for sharing your insights about human culture." As she walked away, Jake felt a mixture of disappointment and excitement. Something was growing between them that went far beyond diplomacy, but they both knew how complicated the situation had become. She was royalty with responsibilities to an empire spanning multiple worlds. He was a human from a species the galaxy still considered newcomers to interstellar society. Over the next few days, Jake noticed changes in how Princess Lyrelay interacted with him during formal meetings. She would catch his eye during boring technical discussions, and he could see hints of the warmth they shared during their private conversations. When Chancellor Corvex or other nobles made particularly stuffy speeches, she would glance at Jake with an expression that was almost like rolling her eyes. But he also noticed the increasing tension from the Zephyrian court. Several nobles had begun making pointed comments about the inappropriate level of interest the princess was showing in human emotional customs. Chancellor Corvex watched their interactions with obvious disapproval, and Jake began to worry that their growing connection might damage the alliance both species needed. The crisis came during a formal dinner when one of the younger Zephyrian nobles made a cutting remark about humans being too primitive to understand proper social boundaries. Jake felt anger rise in his chest, but before he could respond, Princess Lyrelay stood up from her seat. "Lord Thranex," she said in a voice that carried absolute authority, "I find human directness refreshing compared to the veiled insults that pass for cleverness in some circles. Perhaps if more of us had the courage to speak honestly, we would accomplish more than we do with elaborate games of hidden meaning." The noble looked shocked at being addressed so directly, and the entire dining hall fell silent. Jake realized that Princess Lyrelay had just defended him in a way that would be talked about throughout Zephyrian society. By choosing his emotional honesty over their formal traditions, she had made a statement that could affect her own position at court. After the dinner ended, Princess Lyrelay approached Jake with something that looked almost like fear in her eyes. "I may have made things more difficult for both of us," she said quietly. "My people do not appreciate changes to traditional ways, especially when those changes come from contact with other species." Jake looked into her eyes and made a decision that would change everything. "Then maybe it's time for both our peoples to learn that some things are worth the risk," he said. The alarm that woke Jake from sleep was unlike anything he had heard before. Instead of the sharp electronic sound of human emergency systems, this was a deep thrumming that seemed to vibrate through the walls of the Zephyrian ship itself. He rolled out of his bed and grabbed his uniform as the lights in his guest quarters shifted from soft blue to harsh red. His door chimed and Alex Turner burst in without waiting for permission. His friend looked grim and was already wearing full combat gear. "We have a problem, Jake," he said. "A big one." "What kind of problem?" Jake asked as he quickly dressed. "The kind that starts wars," Alex replied. "A faction of Zephyrian military officers has taken control of 3 sections of this ship, including the area where Princess Lyrelai was meeting with her father's advisors. They are calling it a correction of misguided policy." Jake felt his blood turn cold. "Is she safe? We do not know," Alex said. "The rebels cut off communications to the areas they control. But Jake, their leader, is General Thaxon, and according to our intelligence, he believes any alliance with humans makes the Zephyrian Empire look weak." They made their way quickly through corridors filled with confused Zephyrian civilians and loyal military personnel. The crystal walls that had seemed so beautiful before now felt like a maze designed to confuse intruders. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows that made it hard to tell friend from enemy. Captain Rodriguez had set up a temporary command center in one of the smaller meeting rooms. When Jake and Alex arrived, she was studying tactical displays that showed the rebel-controlled sections in red. The situation looked worse than Jake had hoped. "The rebels have superior weapons, and they know this ship better than we do," Captain Rodriguez explained. "Worse, they are holding Princess Lyrelai and several other members of the royal family as leverage against Emperor Vexathara." Dr. Chang looked up from a communication device he was trying to repair. "The rebels broadcast a message demanding that all negotiations with humanity be ended immediately," he said. "They claim contact with our species is corrupting traditional Zephyrian values." Jake stared at the tactical display showing the rebel positions. Somewhere behind those red areas, Princess Lyrelai was in danger, and it was partly because of the connection that had grown between them. If the rebels were using her feelings for human culture as evidence of corruption, then he was responsible for putting her at risk. "We need to get her out," Jake said. Captain Rodriguez shook her head. "Jake, I understand how you feel, but we cannot risk starting a shooting war with Zephyrian forces. Our orders are to protect the diplomatic mission, not launch rescue operations," but Jake was not ready to give up. "These rebels want to prove that humans are weak and primitive, right?" he said. "What if we show them something different? What if we prove that humans do not give up on people they care about?" Alex caught on to what his friend was thinking. "You want to go after her?" Jake nodded. "Not with superior weapons or technology, but with the kind of thinking that makes humans different from other species. We are not stronger or smarter than the Zephyrians, but we are unpredictable." Captain Rodriguez considered this. "The rebel forces would expect us to either retreat and call for military backup or try to negotiate for the princess release," he said slowly. "They would not expect a rescue mission with minimal equipment." Dr. Chang looked nervous but began checking his translation device. "If you are going to try this, you will need to be able to communicate with any Zephyrian civilians who might help," he said. Over the next hour, they developed a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. Jake would lead a small team, including Alex and 2 volunteers from the ship crew. Instead of trying to fight their way through superior forces, they would use psychological tactics and misdirection. The key element was a message Jake would broadcast throughout the ship, speaking directly to individual Zephyrian soldiers rather than their commanding officers. Dr. Chang helped him craft words that would appeal to emotions rather than duty, using the same kind of directness that had first caught Princess Lyrelai attention. The plan required them to reach the ship's main communication center, which was dangerously close to rebel territory. They would have to move through maintenance corridors and service tunnels using routes that the rebels might not be guarding heavily. As they prepared to leave, Jake found himself thinking about all the conversations he had shared with Princess Lyrelai. She had been curious about human courage and the willingness to take risks for people they cared about. Now he was about to show her exactly what that meant. The maintenance tunnels were cramped and filled with alien technology that hummed and sparked around them. Jake led the way, following schematics that Dr. Chang had downloaded from the ship's computer system. Behind him, Alex and the other team members moved with the careful precision of soldiers who knew they were walking into danger. They had been crawling for almost an hour when they heard voices echoing through the tunnel ahead of them. Jake held up his hand and everyone froze as 2 Zephyrian rebels passed by, discussing guard rotations and patrol schedules. After the voices faded, Jake continued. forward until they reached an access panel that should open near the communication center. He carefully removed the cover and peered out into a corridor that appeared empty. The communication center was exactly where the schematics indicated, but there were 4 rebel guards stationed outside. Jake studied their positions and realized there was no way to reach the equipment without being seen. That was when Alex tapped him on the shoulder and pointed to a ventilation grate high up on the opposite wall. If they could create a distraction, the guards might investigate long enough for someone to slip through that grate and reach the communication controls. Jake made hand signals to explain his plan. Alex would create noise at one end of the corridor, while Jake climbed through the ventilation system to reach the communication room. It was risky, but it was their best chance. The distraction worked perfectly. When Alex activated an emergency lighting panel at the far end of the corridor, 3 of the 4 guards went to investigate. Jake dropped through the ceiling grate and quickly began working on the communication system, using the phrases Dr. Chang had taught him. Within minutes, his voice was broadcasting throughout the Zephyrian ship, speaking in their language but with the emotional directness that was uniquely human. He talked about love and choosing hope over fear. He spoke about the connections that make life meaningful and the courage required to stand up for what was right. Jake could hear guards returning, but he continued speaking. He talked about Princess Lyrelai's intelligence and compassion. He described the way she had defended human honesty against those who preferred comfortable lies. Most importantly, he spoke about the individual choice each Zephyrian soldier could make between following orders blindly and thinking for themselves. The communication room door burst open just as Jake finished his broadcast. General Thaxon himself stood there with weapon drawn and fury in his alien eyes. "So the primitive human wants to corrupt our people with emotional weakness," he snarled. Jake stood up slowly with his hands visible. "What I want is for Princess Lyrelai to be safe," he said. "What you want is to prove humans are not worthy of respect. Why do we not settle this face-to-face instead of hiding behind hostages?" General Thaxon's expression shifted to something like surprise. "You would challenge me directly?" Jake nodded, knowing he was probably about to die, but hoping his sacrifice might help Princess Lyrelai and the alliance between their species. Before General Thaxon could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the ship, and Jake realized his broadcast had worked better than he hoped. Individual Zephyrian soldiers were choosing conscience over orders, and the rebellion was falling apart from within. The sound of fighting echoed through the corridors as Jake stood facing General Thaxon in the communication center. Through the walls, he could hear Zephyrian voices arguing and the distinctive sound of energy weapons being powered down rather than fired. His broadcast had worked better than he dared hope as individual soldiers throughout the ship chose to abandon the rebellion. General Thaxon's grip on his weapon tightened as he realized his carefully planned coup was collapsing around him. "Your emotional manipulation will not save you, human," he snarled. "When I execute you publicly, it will show all Zephyrians what happens when we allow primitive species to influence our society." Before Jake could respond, the communication room door exploded inward, and Princess Lyrelai entered with a speed and grace that took his breath away. She was no longer wearing the elegant robes he was accustomed to seeing, but instead had on what appeared to be combat armor made of the same crystalline material as the ship itself. "Your Highness," General Thaxon said with surprise that quickly turned to anger. "You were supposed to be secured with the other hostages." "I was," Princess Lyrelai replied calmly. "But your guards found human emotional honesty more compelling than rebel orders. They chose to release me rather than continue holding innocent people prisoner." She moved to stand between Jake and General Thaxon, and Jake could see that she carried weapons that gleamed with deadly energy. The princess he had come to know through gentle conversations about culture and music had revealed herself to be a formidable warrior when the situation demanded it. "This human has poisoned your mind," General Thaxon accused. "Before contact with his species, you understood your duty to maintain Zephyrian superiority." Princess Lyrelai's expression hardened. "What Jake has shown me is that genuine strength comes from connection and understanding, not from isolation and fear," she said. "You call his honesty primitive, but I call your deception cowardly." General Thaxon raised his weapon, but Princess Lyrelai was faster. In a move that seemed to flow like water, she disarmed him and had her own weapon pointed at his chest before Jake. Could even react by the ancient laws of challenge. I claim the right of single combat, she declared. You have accused me of being corrupted by alien influence. I say that I have been educated by it. Let us settle this according to traditional Zephyrian custom. General Thaxon looked shocked at the formal challenge, but Jake knew enough about their culture to understand what was happening. Princess Lyrelay was invoking an old law that even rebels had to honor, and she was doing it to protect both the Alliance and his life. The combat took place in the main ceremonial chamber where Jake had first met Princess Lyrelay only days before. Word of the challenge had spread throughout the ship, and Zephyrians from both sides gathered to witness what would determine the fate of the rebellion. Jake watched from the designated area for observers, feeling helpless as the woman he had come to love prepared to risk her life. Alex stood beside him, looking grim, as they both realized that neither of them could do anything to influence what happened next. The combat itself was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Both Princess Lyrelay and General Thaxon fought with weapons that created patterns of energy in the air, while moving with speed and precision that seemed impossible. But what struck Jake most was the difference in their styles. General Thaxon fought with rigid traditional forms that were textbook perfect but predictable. Princess Lyrelay fought with the same techniques but added something new. Her movements had a creativity and emotional passion that reminded Jake of human music. She was fighting not just with skill, but with the heart that their conversations had helped her discover. When the combat ended, Princess Lyrelay stood victorious over General Thaxon, who yielded according to the ancient traditions. But more importantly, the assembled Zephyrians had witnessed something unprecedented. Their princess had fought with techniques influenced by human emotional honesty, and she had won because of that influence, not in spite of it. Emperor Vexthara arrived on the flagship within hours, accompanied by a fleet of loyal warships. Jake expected the alien ruler to be angry about the chaos that human contact had brought to his empire, but instead the emperor seemed thoughtful as he examined the aftermath of the failed rebellion. He spoke privately with Princess Lyrelay for over an hour while Jake and the other humans waited nervously. When they finally emerged from the private meeting, the Emperor approached Jake directly. "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell," he said formally, "my daughter tells me that your species approaches relationships with a directness that we find both disturbing and admirable. She also tells me that this directness saved her life and preserved our alliance." Jake bowed as protocol required, but the Emperor held up a hand to stop him. "She further tells me that she believes this emotional honesty represents a strength rather than a weakness, and that contact with your species has made her a better leader and a better person." The Emperor paused.